Money is so tangible and counting it is so easy that we overestimate its importance. There's a lot that money can do for you, but there is a longer list of things that it cannot do for you. Your desire to show off and compete with other people is based off the assumption that they are watching. And the truth is they're not. They are busy thinking about themselves and their own comparison group. Once I became to closer terms with the game that is played there, then it pushes you towards thinking about spending your money in a way that is less about status and more about utility. The crazy success comes with a cost that very few people, including most of the time myself, are not willing to pay. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to deserve it. No shortcuts. It's all just like find the price and pay it. It's so that eventually one day you will achieve a level of success in which you don't have to work so hard anymore. That's what's motivating you. I think it's always the case that people want to squeeze as much opportunity as they can out of everything in life, whether it's in your career or whatever it might be. And that invariably is going to eventually catch up to you. Like room for error in what you're doing is a massively important thing to have. Most people these days have what I call thought jobs. Their job is to work with their head. It's not to dig a ditch or like pull a lever. Their job is to make a decision with something. And in that world, what you really need more than anything else is time to think, time to ponder, time to like figure out a problem in your head. And what does that look like? It looks like sitting on the couch. It looks like going for a walk. It doesn't look like work, but most bosses will not allow that. And so they don't have any time in their day for something that looks inefficient, but is actually going to be like the thing that's actually critical to their job. So I think people intuitively understand that you need unstructured time in your day, where you should just have like a 4-hour block in your calendar that says thinking time. But you can't do that. It's because everyone wants to like squeeze efficiency and opportunity out of their calendar. And what is productive are things that don't look like work. You need to sit at your desk and type. And every boss thinks that. That's what's so hard. Yeah. And I think that's also why it's very difficult to innovate within a company. A lot of metrics within businesses, maybe they made sense at one point, but then people just keep using them. And you're using the same metric and people don't ask, like, does this metric actually lead to success? Or is this just what we've been trained, what we've been told to do? There might be some point in your career in which calls were productive. There might be like very early in your career, like your job is to cold call, like the number of calls you did. But if you keep that for the rest of your career, like you need to change the metrics in what you're following. There is a cost to pay for almost anything. And a trick in almost any endeavor in life is figuring out what the cost is and just being willing to pay it. Like there's things in any job that just suck. It's like dumb, boring admin work. And if you can get to where half of it is fun, that's great. Take someone who is uber successful, Musk, Gates, Zuckerberg, Michael Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, all those kind of people. If you actually drill into what it took for them to achieve that success, the cost that they paid to get that success in their personal life, often for their health, for their mental well-being, is off the charts. But it's so common for us to look at them and be like, I want that life. That looks like an amazing life. But when you actually factor in the cost of what it took, you're like, I don't know. The crazy success comes with a cost that very few people, including most of the time myself, are not willing to pay. So some people I think are born with it and some people are not, which is why like the success is so stratified. If you want to be loved, the way that you get that is to deserve to be loved. And I think it's true for a lot of things. If you want to be wealthy, like you need to deserve it. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to deserve it. No shortcuts. It's all just like find the price and pay it. Sears was kind of it was the most successful retailer, but they were everywhere. They were so dominant back in the day. Nobody could touch them. It was truly the Walmart of its day, or even like the Apple of its day. I was just like, nobody compete with this. And then they lost everything and went bankrupt and then lost it. And if you dig back into what happened, of like, they became successful because they were so scrappy and so terrified of competitors. That's why they became successful. As soon as they got big, it all went to their head. And they were like, we're Sears, nobody compete with us. They stopped innovating. They ignored this upcomer that was chasing them called Walmart, completely ignored it. And by the time that they realized what had happened, it was way too late. They were gone. And I think that's actually a very common story, that it happens in individuals' lives as well, where the reason that you are working so hard is so that eventually one day you will achieve a level of success in which you don't have to work so hard anymore. That's what's motivating you, is the dream that you can one day relax. So when you become successful, you justifiably think, I can stop working so hard. I don't need to grind as hard anymore. And then the moment you think that, and it's justified, you lose what actually made you successful to begin with. And then that's the downfall. Like, you never let your guard down. What made you successful, you never let go of that. You know that you're like, because I've become successful, I can now sleep in. I can now work fewer hours. You know you're doing it. You think it's justified. But what you are blind to is like what that's actually going to do to your career. When does a startup lose its magic? And the precise moment when it happens for every one of these companies is when the CEO stops building the product, when the CTO stops coding, when the chief marketing officer is not writing the copy anymore. It's like once you become so big that the senior executives are detached from actually doing the work, when the musician stops writing their own songs, and that's when you lose the magic. You're not doing it yourself anymore. I think you see this a lot in investing, where you have someone who's a very talented investor, very good at picking stocks, finding the right business, and then they launch a fund. What does launching a fund entail? Half your time is going to be fundraising. Half your time is going to be accounting, HR, you got to hire people. And then you're completely detached from what actually made you good to begin with. And that is so common in any business. If you are the entrepreneur, the CEO, whoever it is, and you get to a point where you're like, hey, I've become really successful, and I became this successful because I wanted to step back. You need to be honest with yourself and remove yourself from the situation. The people who fall into problems are like, I grinded for 20 years. Now I'm successful, but I'm not going to leave this business that I built. I'm going to stay here and just become fat, happy, and lazy. That's when it eventually just crumbles. Is there a single new invention that is amazing in and of itself? It's usually that you have a small invention, and then 10 years later, another small invention, 20 years later, another small invention, and those things come together, and that's what creates something amazing. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. It was first invented by a guy named Humphrey Davies, who created something that looked exactly like the light bulb, I think 20 years before Thomas Edison. The difference was that light bulb that he built, it was impossibly bright, and it would only stay lit for like 5 seconds. What Edison did is he moderated the intensity and he lengthened the endurance of the light bulb. That was incredible, but let's not pretend that he built that flaming bulb from scratch. He didn't. He took what other people had done and built on top of it. So whenever a new invention comes out, I think it's very easy to be like, what is this useful for? And a lot of times the answer is like, we don't know, but someone, like, this is going to be something that somebody combines with other things in the future that's going to become something incredible. And it's true for almost every like big invention. The two that are most interesting to me was the invention of the car and the airplane, which when both of those came out in the early 1900s, the first reaction to those was like, I don't understand why anyone would want this. The first car was so inferior to the horse, and the first plane was so inferior to the train. So everyone looked at it and they're like, what the hell is the use? And then it was like, oh, I see, it's a rich person's toy. Virtually nobody saw, even the people who worked in those industries, what it would become, which was like good for transporting people. It was a very long path. It usually takes 10 to 20 years at least before people are like, oh, now I get it. But it's actually common for virtually every new technology that you cannot fathom what it's going to eventually become. There's a lot that money can do for you, but there is a longer list of things that it cannot do for you. And I think if you go through a period of life where your income rises, your net worth rises a little bit, you can very starkly realize the latter of what it cannot do for you. It's actually very difficult to know what you want in life. And that sounds like a kind of a crazy statement, but I think the truth is we're all very different. So what I want might be different from what you want. There's no universal right way. But we are so accustomed to looking for signals from other people. Well, what is Jay driving? What kind of clothes are you wearing? Well, how big is your house? I'm going to try to take my cues from you, and especially you're going to take your cues from people who you think are happier than you. So if you're going to look on TV, on Instagram, from movies, those people look pretty happy. Well, what kind of lifestyle are they living? What kind of car are they driving? And then like trying to form your mental model of what a good life is from that. And I think that is a very imperfect way to do it. I think everybody needs to try different forms of spending more on clothes, on food, on houses, on travel, whatever it might be, because everyone is completely different. And if you're taking your signals from people whose happiness might be a facade, particularly if it's on social media, that has just exploded in the last 20 years, where it's a faux performance of happiness. If that's your signal for happiness, then it's a very difficult thing. Money is so tangible and counting it is so easy that we overestimate its importance. We put it to the top of the pile of importance of what we're trying to chase. And if you don't have a good sense of what you want out of life. One, with more money, it's something that is so easy and obvious to track and chase in your life, even if there are so many other things, relationships, health, time, whatever it might be, that should be of higher importance. There's a lot of other things, though, that should be of the highest importance. Relationships with your spouse, with your children, with your career, with yourself, that are just almost impossible to track. But almost nothing is more tangible than money. And not only is it more tangible, but very similar to health. And I think there is a truth, too, that a lot of life has always been a competition among other people for resources, for attention, for mates, for jobs. But it doesn't necessarily matter how well I'm doing. What really matters is how well I'm doing relative to you. That's the truth to it. That can be kind of unfortunate, but there is a lot of truth to that. It's more true than ever today. We used to compare ourselves to our neighbors and our coworkers and maybe some people on TV and magazines. And that was your comparison group. When you were trying to sum up how well am I doing in life, that's who you compared yourself to. Now it is an endless performance of an algorithmically curated feed of how supposedly beautiful, happy, and successful everybody else is. And so I think we live in an era where it is easier than ever to feel like you're falling behind. Because no matter how well you're doing, you open up Instagram and immediately it's going to show you 700 people who appear to be doing better than you. The power of social comparison is just exponentially stronger than it's ever been. In your 20s, you worry about what everyone else is thinking of you. In your 30s, you say, I don't care what anyone's thinking of me. And in your 40s, you finally realize that nobody was thinking about you to begin with. There's a lot of truth to that if there is a trick, a hack to this, it's slowly getting to the point where your desire to show off, materially especially, and compete with other people is based off the assumption that they are watching. And the truth is they're not. They're busy worrying about themselves. They are busy thinking about themselves and their own comparison group. When you realize that the people who are paying attention to you are a very close-knit group of people who don't care about your car, don't care about your shoes, don't care about your watch, your spouse, your children, your parents, a couple of your friends, a couple of your coworkers, a small group of people who are probably at least not attracted to your material possessions. And I think once I became to closer terms with the game that is played there, then it pushes you towards thinking about spending your money in a way that is less about status and more about utility. What is not about climbing the social ladder and trying to impress people who aren't paying attention, the small, half dozen people who are close to me in my life and do care, and I care desperately about spending quality time with them and whatnot. If I can use money for that rather than playing the silly game that no one's even watching me to begin with, that's a much more productive use of money. An entry-level BMW is just about signaling. It's just to show other people, hey, look, I bought a BMW. But a high-end Toyota gives you nice, cushy leather seats and a moonroof and a great sound system and all those luxuries that are actually good for you. That's utility versus status. You start asking those questions in a very appropriately selfish way. But you're doing it in a humble way of just, I just want to use money as a tool to live a better life, not as a yardstick of status to compare myself against others by. It's not that nobody is watching. It's not to say, live like a bum because nobody's watching. This is not completely black and white, but I think we overestimate the extent to which other people are watching. I think there are a lot of parents who are like, I don't want to raise spoiled children, so I'm going to make them work their butts off, and I'm going to withhold money from them, and I'm going to make them learn. And it's done very well-intentioned. But in the eyes of a child, the lesson that you're trying to get across almost never gets across. And the lesson that they hear from the parents is, I, the parent, am superior to you. I am up here, you are down there, I'm better than you. And rather than giving your child grit and integrity, you give them a sense of inferiority. It's always well-intentioned, but that's almost always how it comes across. You have to teach your kids through example. You have to lead by example, not by humiliation. If you are a family of higher means, higher income, you have to live the same lifestyle as your kids. It's almost impossible to say, mom and dad are up here and you're down here. It does not work. So choose your lifestyle carefully. I think tied to that is the idea that the kids are always watching. You don't have to sit down with your children and say, let me teach you about money. Let me teach you about budgeting and investing and saving and spending. You don't have to do that. They're already paying attention. There's so much evidence that people inherit their political beliefs, particularly from their father. But most of the time, parents do not sit down with their children and say, let me give you a lecture on politics. Let me tell you why I believe this. The kids just pick it up through osmosis. And I think money is exactly the same. That you don't have to sit down with your kids and say, let me teach you about money. They are watching from the time they're 3 years old or whatever. Every time you say, we can't afford this. Every time you go to the store and say, I value this, I don't value that. Every time that you're criticizing somebody else. Every time you make a sly comment about the stock market or interest rates, whatever, or mortgages, whatever it might be, they're making a mental model of it. They're already getting it. Just make sure you're being very careful and cautious and thoughtful about your own financial behaviors because they're watching.